We are on to the blue spoke now, and we're going to start down here with these teardrop shapes, and we're going to use, you guessed it, a daisy stitch. And I've already done that on the two on the side. I'm using 2 strands, but this middle one, see how long and skinny it is? So I can make that like a regular daisy stitch. It's just going to be really, really long. But I'm going to do something a little bit extra on it. So I've made the daisy stitch right there. And I'm pulling it so the tension is not too tight. And put that little stitch at the top. Now, I could leave it like that. And like when it's not moving around or anything, it's covering the lines. But these are pretty loose, and I really want this to stay in place. So on a really long daisy stitch like this, sometimes what I will do is I will tack down some part of one of the legs. And I'm debating whether to tack down the legs on these as well, but I know for sure that I'm going to come down about 1/4 of the way down on that long one. And I'm just going to put a little bitty, just like a couching stitch, just like we did with the couching, but I'm just using the same thread that's already on the needle. And I'm just going to come over to the other side, put a little tiny stitch in the on the opposite side. So you can't even really see that, but now that is really much more secure. You know, those aren't going to move around. And honestly, that one was pretty loose, so I think I'm going to do the same thing over here. And so, yes, this is variegated thread, and so that's a little bit of a dark color right there on that lighter blue. But you know what? It's actually okay. It gives it a little bit of interest, which that's good. That stitch is going to blend in on that one, but that's the beauty of variegated thread. You never know which color is going to come up. All right, so the pattern does not have it has a line and a dot inside each of these, and it's just so small. I think I'm just going to put, you know what, I'm going to switch to 1 strand of thread for inside here. All right, I now have 1 strand of thread, and I'm just going to make that straight stitch right down the middle of that one. That one got really loose, but that's okay. And I'll put one over here. And honestly, well, no, I think I've got room for the little dot. It does need a little something to kind of, it's all lines right now. And I have 1 strand on my needle, and I am going to do a 1 strand. So I'm going to hop back over to this side, and I'm going to do a little 1 strand French knot. That is pretty rare and not that easy, but I just don't want it to be huge. So I'm going to use 1 strand, and I think I'm going to wrap, let's see what 3 times looks like. To be really careful you don't go back in down in the same spot, you know, just like any French knot, but particularly with 1 strand, because it will really, it's such a small little knot, it will really just pull right through. 1, 2, 3. Wrap it a little bit tightly right there. Okay. All right, so there's that, and you know, I think I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna go ahead and do a knot, a French knot right up here in the middle. If your long, skinny daisy stitch just ended up really, really skinny and you don't have room, then you know, you don't even really have to put this. But if it needs a little bit of extra decoration, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put that line right down the center with 1 stitch right down the center. Okay, so there are the daisy stitches. I zoomed in a little bit so you could see those daisy stitches a little bit better. And now I still have 1 strand of thread on my needle, and so I'm going to hop up here and I'm going to do these, I don't know what you call them, straight, I mean, they're straight stitches. They're all just straight stitches. It's just kind of a filler. I just was trying to find some texture or something that was a little bit different. So it's just little rows of straight stitches. Really simple, no big deal at all. So just fill those in. This is a little bit, there's a stitch called the seed stitch, which is just random straight stitches all over the place. So I guess you could say this is kind of a variation on seed stitch, but it's in a pattern. Anyway, that's all there is for these. I went ahead and did the split back stitch for the outline of the shield and these lines in here. I used 2 strands for these interior lines and I used 3 strands for the outside line. You did not need to see me do that again. We've already talked about it. And I also went ahead and did all of the French knots. The ones down here, I used 3 strands and wrapped them one time, and up here I did, or you know, down here, whatever. Down here I did use 3 strands and wrapped them twice, so they'll be a little bit chunkier. Now we're going to work on these little paisley-esque type shapes. And the stitch we're going to use for those is the Fishbone Stitch. And you know, I have a separate video tutorial that I'm going to go ahead and play for you right here, so you don't have to go search for it. So just stick around and it'll come up in just a minute and you'll see how to use that stitch to make these shapes. Despite its name, the Fishbone Stitch is very often used, but of course you can use it on any kind of elongated teardrop shape. It's very simple, and here's how you do it. We're going to start at the top tip of your shape and make 1 stitch straight down the center. Now we're going to come to either side, doesn't matter which one, come up right next to the end of that stitch. We're going to make a slightly angled stitch, come across and go down just below, just slightly below, and on the other side of that first stitch you made. Now we're going to hop to the other side, come up right next to it, again make an angled stitch, come across and go down right below the straight stitch you made. Now the whole rest of the stitch is the exact same thing. Crisscross back and forth, making long elongated stitches that just barely cross over the center line. And you'll come slightly down, slightly a little bit lower for each stitch, both when you come up here on the side and when you go down across the center line. And that is all there is to the Fishbone Stitch. One thing to note about the Fishbone Stitch is that it does use a lot of thread. There's a lot of thread left on the back as well. So if you're using a really pricey silk thread or a thread that you don't have very much of and you are trying to finish up a design, you might reconsider this stitch and replace it with a stitch that doesn't use quite as much thread. But it is a really pretty stitch. And as you build up the stitches, I think you can see that, and I'm using a variegated thread here, so maybe it's a little harder to tell, but that slight crisscross in the center will give you a textured line down the center, which is why it's so good for leaves. It sort of automatically gives you a center vein line without having to necessarily stitch a vein. Of course, you can always come back and put a line down the center if you want, but this one will sort of automatically give you the look of a vein down the center. So there it is, worked on a shape that is symmetrical. Let's go over here now and see how it works on a shape that is curved like this. Working on a curved shape is really just the same. You just want to trust the pattern lines, but you still start at the top and make a straight line down the center. And now I'm going to come to one side or the other, and I can get it, come up and cross over, and then start the same process. And it might feel a little strange at first because it's not symmetrical. This one is, you know, a little bit wider on this side and it's narrower over here. But if I just keep following the edge and go back and forth from side to side, it will all work out. And there you have it. It seemed like I would perhaps need to put a few more stitches on this side since just because of the angle, but it turns out I still ended up using the same amount of stitches, but that's okay. If you need to on one side or the other, like if I had finished over here and I still had some space to fill in over here, I would just add some extra stitches on this side. But either way, you can see what a pretty stitch this is, and very, very handy to have in your bank of stitch knowledge. So you've watched the video now, so you know how to do the fishbone stitch, and the shapes I was doing in that tutorial are bigger than this, but it will still work on these, and obviously these are the curved variety of the one I showed you. But I'll just quickly do one here so you can see I'm using 2 strands. I experimented with just using 1 strand because these are such small shapes. But honestly, one strand just didn't, you know, it worked fine. It was just a lot of stitches and it didn't have quite the same, chunky is not the right word, the enough texture to it or something. I don't know. I just wanted it to have a little tiny bit more, each of these to stand out a little bit more. The one strand was just too delicate. They just kind of, I don't know, they weren't puffy or something. I don't know how to describe it. So anyway, that was my random thought process about numbers of strands. But as I showed you in the video, I'm just going back and forth, coming down, slightly crossing over. It's such a tight space in here. Obviously you can't cross over a whole lot, but you can do it. And honestly, since it's the first one of these that I'm doing, I'm not sure if it's going to be the kind of thing where I end up having more. I have a feeling on this right side of this one, I'm going to have more stitches maybe. As I mentioned in the video, you don't, on these curved asymmetrical shapes, you don't always necessarily have an exact number, the same number of stitches on one side as you do on the other. Just really never know until you start stitching it. Just depends on the angle and, you know, where you put your previous stitches. So it looks like maybe on that side I'm finished. And you can see on this side way down here, I'm like already way down close to the point, and up here I'm still working up here. But let me see. If I put one more stitch right there, honestly, I think that's enough. So that one did end up being, you know, symmetrical. Who knows what this one's going to be? But I think if I put one more stitch, it's going to be too crowded next to this one. So that's all you have to do for these. Just repeat them. One reason I flipped the hoop around is because I like to start at the top and have the top away from me. So that's why I'm facing it this way. But anyway, that's all you have to do for all of these shapes. All right, moving on to this circle. We are going to use, remember the Spirograph, the so-called Spirograph stitch that we used. Can't remember which spoke it was on at the moment. Let me see. I think it was red. It was the second one we did. Well, we're going to do that again, but we're going to change it up just a little bit. But we are going to start out the same way. We're going to mark 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. And now we're going to mark, make sure you can see those. Now we're going to mark one point halfway between each of those. Like that. Now, I am using one strand for this circle. I'm going to start at 12 o'clock. And now, so if this is 12, that's 9. I am going to come across to this mark right here, this point, the one that's between 9 and 6. I don't know why I always go to the left. You could absolutely go to the right and work, you know, this way. I don't know why. I just tend to go left. So I think either way will be fine, but here's how I'm going to explain it. So up at 12, here's 9, but go down at this mark that is between 9 and 6. So I'm going to go down there. So that's my first stitch. Now, I have a mark here, here's 12, and then I have this mark. I am going to imagine that there are two spots, 2 points in between here. So from here on out, there's going to be 2 points between this one and this one. So here and here. There's going to be 2 points between here and here. 1, 2. I could mark those, but honestly, at this point, it gets like there's a ton of marks, and it'd be a little hard to determine which one is my 12, 9, 6, and 3, but particularly hard to determine which one is my middle mark. So I'm just going to eye it. So I'm going to come up. So if there's 2 marks between 12 and this middle mark, there's going to be one here and here. So I'm going to come up just to the left of 12. And from here on out, it's pretty simple. As we did before, I'm going to come across, and so I went to this side up here. I'm going to go to this side over here. Same thing. Imagine there between here and here, there are 2 points. So I'm going to go down at the point that's just on this side of where I just where this one went in. Go back up here. That was my first one in between. Here's my second. So I'm going to go just to that side of there and then go between these 2. Now you can just continue. So now I'm coming up at that mark, and since I came up at a mark, I know that I'm going to go down at a mark. You know, one I've already marked with the pen. Now we're back to a section that has 2 invisible points. And then here's 2 invisible points between here. And go down at that second invisible point, and I am back to a mark. Come up at that mark and go down at this mark. And that is what you're going to do all the way around. All right, so do that all the way around until you know, it always gets confusing about like when to stop, but I always take a look and I see which one has make sure that each place where the thread goes in or comes out has a V on it. So I'll keep working around and you can see what it looks like when I'm finished. And there is our finished Spirograph stitch. And I really love this one. I really like the way it came out. You get this cool little almost perfect circle in the center. What I need to do now is to outline, cover up that white edge, and I think I'm just going to use 2 strands in a split back stitch. But I need to tell you one thing about the Spirograph stitch that you're doing here with 1 strand. You need to start out with more than a yard of thread cut and threaded onto your needle. The first time I did it, I had about exactly a yard and I didn't have quite enough thread to finish because you're looping it around so many times. So I cut it about maybe 3 to 6 inches longer than a yard, and it was still pretty close, so at least 6 inches more than a yard of thread when you are starting this Spirograph stitch. So now I'm off to outline this with a split back stitch of 2 strands, and I will do the French knot in the middle. I think I will do the 2 strands and probably wrap it 2 times. To complete the blue spoke, we are going to use what's called a coral stitch for the outline. And I've already started it here. A coral stitch is really just a line that has a series of knots stitched into the line as you're going around. I am using 4 strands of thread here, and that's unusual. I rarely use 4 strands of thread. But 3 was just a little bit too thin for this because this just does, while it has knots in it, it doesn't have a lot of bulk to it. And but I didn't want something too wide because we're right up next to this real wavy one. But and 6 strands seemed a little bit much, so I landed on 4. So it's really rare for me to use 4, and it's probably the only place on this hoop we'll use 4 strands. So to complete the coral stitch, I will show it to you first. You're going to, this is the direction I'm going, you're going to lay the thread onto the line. So there's my line, I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to take the thread, the needle, and I'm going to go down on this, the side that's towards me. And I'm going to hold that thread in place while I pull that needle through. Now I'm going to try to keep my fingers out of the way so you can see what I'm doing, but I do kind of have to use my fingers to hold this in place. So I kind of keep a loop open with this finger while I'm pulling it through. I'm still sort of holding that thread in place. Now I'm going to come up inside that loop on the other side of the thread, right on the opposite side of the line. You see that? Now comes a slightly tricky part. It's not hard, it's just tricky. So there's a couple of ways you can accomplish this. You can hold I put the needle about halfway through. I didn't pull it all the way through. So I can hold this needle in place part ways through the fabric. I can reach around to the back side and I can pull on this thread. Can you see how it's pulling that knot? And I'm going to pull it until it is against the fabric. And now I can sort of hold that knot in place and pull the thread the rest of the way through. Like that. Let me zoom in so you can maybe see that a little bit better. Okay, that's really zoomed in. So hold the thread against the line, put the needle down on the side that's towards you on one side of the line. Okay, I'm going to pull the needle through, but I'm also going to put my fingers in there and kind of hold that thread open, that loop that's going to form like that. I'm going to come up on the other side, right across on the other side of the line, right where all those threads meet. I'm not going to pull the needle all the way through. I'm going to reach around to the back. And here's the part that I find tricky. I often will reach around behind there and grab the wrong thread, and I will grab the thread that's running through the eye of the needle and I'll pull it out of the eye. So make sure that you're pulling the correct thread, all right? Pull that thread until that knot forms against the fabric, and now you can pull that through. I kind of sometimes will put my finger on that knot. One more time, lay the thread on the line, put the needle on your side of the line, hold that loop open. Oh, come on. Bring the needle up just on the opposite side of the line inside the loop. Hold the needle in place. Make sure you are grabbing the right thread. Pull that thread against the fabric until it forms a knot. Now I have also done it this way. Here I'm going to start out the same. Lay it on the line, needle down, pull it through, hold a loop, come up, and then I have pulled it all the way through and put my finger right there. Pull, but honestly, see, I ran into a little bit of trouble right there. The strands almost went a little wonky. So it worked out, but I'll be honest, this way really does work better, even though it feels a little bit strange at first to do the thing where you don't pull the needle all the way through, reach behind there, pull the correct one. That way you can see what you're doing when you pull it against the fabric, and then pull it through like that. Because what you don't want is the line of thread that's between these knots to be loose. You want it to be nice and tight, okay? Otherwise the pattern line underneath shows and it gets kind of wavy. Down here, when I first started, it was a little, you know, hadn't quite found my rhythm yet, so it's a teeny bit wavy, but that's okay. I got better as I went along. So that's all there is to it. Start on this side, go around, make sure you put a knot. You know, one of the places you have a knot is right here at the point, and then just flip the hoop around and go down the other side. And that's it for the blue spoke. 2 more to go. Really beautiful colors ahead, indigo and violet. So that's up next.